I am sat in this sort of cloud of fragrance that's almost intoxicating because I decided to talk about hyacinths today.
Dan, is that apron one of yours?
Yes, it is. Shameless, isn't it? This handy little bit here is very good for putting snips in. And then there's a couple of pockets. They're good for seeds, pencil.
And it even turns on some of the ladies that come to the garden in the summer when I'm wearing shorts and they look at me and they said, "Have you got anything on underneath that apron?" I said, "Well, would you like to lift it and have a look?"
Hello and welcome to episode 81 of Talking Dirty, over at East Ruston Old Vicarage, looking like he's in Santa's grotto with his fire raging behind him, indicating that it is a bit of a chilly day. We have Alan Edward Herbert Gray, our happy and very handsome horticulturalist.
Well, thank you for that warm welcome. And warm in orange, dare I say, over in Cambridgeshire, we have Thordis Maria Sophia Fredriksson.
I've gone slightly psychedelic today. Pink and orange, wibbly wobbly 70s stripes.
Very you.
Very me. And we are so excited to finally welcome back one of the busiest men in horticulture, the curator of RHS Garden Wisley and the author of a new book, Matt Pottage.
Hey, good morning. Thank you for having me back.
I have forgotten your middle name. I should have checked.
I forgot we do middle names on this podcast. George.
Matthew George Pottage, or Pottage.
How formal. I like potage, but I'm from Hull, not from France, so it's normally pottage. But potage will do nicely today.
Matthew Pottage. I mean, we can go fully French.
It all feels very grand and proper looking at Alan in his stately home there with a fire roaring in the background. So it's a much more fitting and there's a lot of gravitas going on around you, Alan, whereas behind me, I'm in my office at Wisley, which is a magnolia'd wall and some plastic trunking.
And a socket.
Which I'm trying to cover with my arm.
It's very strange you say that because a visitor, there was a family, mum, dad and two children on Sunday in the garden visiting. And the father came up to me and whispered very surreptitiously, he said, "Your garden is absolutely fabulous. My wife was wondering if you do guided tours of the inside of your house, because that must be equally fabulous."
I'd be interested to know, do you?
I've been after a guided tour of his wardrobe for about 12 years.
That would be fascinating too. Yeah, I think both of the above, please. Let me know when they're going to start.
We'll both be booked up. Now, Matt, we've obviously, we could talk about plants for hours, but we must give a little bit of time to talking about your new book, How to Garden When You Rent, which I was really interested to read because, well, first of all, I just absolutely love everything you do in your own garden at home, which is obviously where the inspiration came from. But also, I think a lot of people, we do, even if you don't rent, you end up gardening a bit like you rent. So it's really interesting to get your hands on a book with that as the concept. I assume it did come from the fact that you have rented and gone through this yourself.
It did, absolutely. And Dole and Kindersley, when they first got in touch with me, one of the first things they just sense checked was very politely, "Do you really rent? Is that really a rental garden? Have you really done all that in a rental garden?" Yes. Yeah, I'm not just barefaced lying on my Instagram every time I post a picture of this. So they were quite, that's where they originally picked it up. And I think they were quite taken with that. And for me, it was an opportunity to be able to share my thought process, which I think has been a lot of thought processes, I'm sure, for lots of renters, that whole, I don't know how long I'm going to be here. This isn't mine. There is no point. It's going to be my money spent in someone else's space. It's just easier to do nothing. And one day I'll have my own garden. So, I mean, of course, I've always been gardening and I love gardening, but I was kind of thinking, if we've got people who are renting for 10, 20 years, especially in the southeast of London, where it's hard to get onto the property ladder, that's so many years of gardening goodness, well-being, physical and mental exercise, good stuff for you and your body that they're missing out on, simply because a lot of people think, I'll start gardening when I can afford a garden when I get there. And I'm just thinking how much enjoyment, well-being, good feel-good factor I've had and still get from my little rental garden in Fulham. So I kind of thought, oh, it could be an opportunity to share some of that.
Yeah, and how to sort of triumph with containers and how to choose your climbers, and even sort of because another thing is how much money you can end up spending if you don't have ground to plant into, and you've got to buy all your containers, and as well as buying your plants and your compost and all these things, it becomes really expensive. I loved how you cut up a fleece and put it in a crate to turn it into a planter. Yeah,
an old packing crate, which the compost would have fallen through, and it was an old jumper just cut up. And I kind of wanted I wanted lots of prettiness in it. I mean, I really value prettiness in a garden space, to put it very basically. A space for me, I'm going to get enjoyment and well-being from it if it looks beautiful. So I'm happy to do upcycling, you reuse an old jumper to line something. I'm not quite going down, the plant an old toilet pan, or milk bottles with bedding plants. And nothing wrong with that, of course. That excites some people, and that's good too. But I kind of wanted a bit of a middle ground. And with containers, to showcase and to highlight some really slow growing evergreens that give you structure year round, that you can take with you when you move, that will happily sit in a pot for 10 years, rather than maybe spending more money on shorter lived plants, or plants that grow very quick, become pot bound quickly and then are a problem. So yeah, there is a big emphasis on containers, as you can imagine.
I imagine it must have been really hard for you to do this book, because it is aimed at the beginner. And yet your garden is such an advanced rental garden, and it's a long time since you began your gardening journey. Was that in itself a bit tricky?
It was a little bit, for sure. And you know what? I kept casting my mind back to thinking when I was starting out in my gardening journey, because I don't do lots of seed sowing of annuals anymore. It's just not something I've got space for. I like that, but I don't have space for it. But just casting my mind back to when I started gardening, when I was younger, I had less money, and it's just a really good, quick, easy way to raise plants from seed. So yeah, I did go back to some of those basics, but also talking with friends that are renting properties in London and aren't experienced gardeners. Some of them aren't in gardening at all. A couple of good friends of ours in Fulham, who, neither of them are in the horticultural industry, but they have a small garden, and just seeing what they'd done, how they'd approached it, what they'd stumbled with. And, some of the plant selections and some of the plant mentions in the book, I think, are quite relevant, because people end up going to the nearest, unfortunately, the nearest DIY store, or sometimes just what's out the front of the local convenience store. And certainly around me in Fulham, it's loads of box. So people run straight into box blight and box caterpillar issues, or little miniature roses, which they don't give a good long-term performance, or jasmine polyanthemum sold as a house plant, and then if it's planted out in London and completely left, it gets enormous and overwhelms everything. So you see these few handfuls of plants that appear everywhere, and then small trees. I've been really keen to say in the book, always a tree for every space, even the smallest spaces, slow growing, well-behaved trees. But normally what people end up with in London especially, they go and buy a standard bay, they plant it in the ground, and as you guys know, Laurus nobilis, the straight culinary bay, gets enormous with a free root run, especially in mild central London. So again, loads of gardens being taken over by huge bay trees. So just trying to trumpet and champion some of the slower growing, well-behaved trees like Luma apiculata, the lovely Chilean myrtle, or arbutus, some of the strawberry trees. Because the other thing here, which I'm also very keen to get on people's radars, is obviously all the well-being and the goodness for the individual doing some gardening. But if you have a little bit of an outdoor space, we all know about the climate crisis. If you've got some outdoor space, and it's your gift to do something with it, we all need to be doing something with it. Just if it is planting one tree, growing some plants, you're providing some kind of ecosystem service, some nectar for bees, somewhere for a bird to nest, somewhere for rainwater to soak into if everything's paved and you've got lots of containers. So, storm rain isn't running just straight down the drain. So kind of a bit of a responsibility there, but not too heavy to overwhelm people. The book's not preachy at all, but to hopefully get people to think, hang on, if I've got a bit of a green space, maybe I could be doing something to support the planet.
Matt, this book for me brought back memories of when we lived in London, in Marylebone, and we had a I don't know, lower ground floor flat, I think you'd call it. In actual fact, I put in French doors in the at the back because I could walk out then into this little yard.
Yeah.
And this little yard is very much like your little yard. And I made a garden there. And I wish this book had been available then, because the ideas that you have in this book are absolutely fantastic. Now, first of all, I'd just like to say this is not a book just for small gardens. I mean, the ideas in this book, I think, are actually absolutely cracking, good ideas. They can be scaled up, they can be used in any kind of gardening, especially in areas which are closer to your house. You know, if you've got a large garden, I mean, I've got a large garden, but most of it is sort of like miles away, you know what I mean? But that little area close to the house. And the other thing, outside my kitchen in the house here, I've got a little courtyard, which is quite shady for most of the year. And I've got lots of ideas from this book. And I have to say, I loved your little bit about cracks and crevices. I don't know whether you called it cracks and crevices, but you know.
I think so. But they are cracks and crevices.
I'm thinking of planting things like Leptinella, that lovely little ferny leaf thing that creeps along and will run between the cracks of paving stones, and Pratia, pedunculata, that lovely little blue star. I just love things like that. And the other thing that I want to try, whether I can do it or not, I don't know, but I want to try vertical gardening. This is a relatively new phenomenon, I suppose. Probably it's been around for about the last 20 years. But not commonly known or commonly used. There's one or two big projects in central London. There's one on Piccadilly, I know, and probably you know of lots of others. But the idea of vertical gardening is a living wall, perhaps, shall we say, is absolutely fascinating to me, and I just love the idea of that.
Yeah, I thought, hang on, we need to feature a little living wall, because I feel now it's at the point where you can buy it affordably, you can buy it easily to put together at home. It doesn't need a complex watering system. They have these little reservoirs. And as that one shows in the book, it was, I mean, I am a gardener, but I'm not the most practical of people. I just about own a drill and know how to use it. And I could easily put that together, put it up on the wall, plant it up. And again, sometimes when you're in small, awkward spaces, the other excuse and the other thing that, well, it's not an excuse, you can easily understand why people say this, is that, you know, their garden is an awkward shape, or there's no real floor space, or it's all paved, or it's a space for the bins, or it's shared with a neighbour and they need to be able to push their pram and their bikes through. All these kind of things are real life. But usually there's a wall or a decent fence or somewhere. And I mean, you can do them just blocks of one thing, but you can also get quite a bit of diversity in there. And the one in the book, I've got a few different wacky ivy cultivars, and of course something variegated. I've got a pink variegated Tradescantia in there, which really stands out against the ivies.
Oh, is that Maiden's Blush?
It's one called Nanouk, a Japanese cultivar, I think.
I've got Maiden's Blush, and unbelievably, I saw that you'd got a very good variegated Tradescantia in your garden, and Maiden's Blush in the garden here is now hardy.
Yeah.
It gets cut, the top dies back, but it comes back from the root every year. It has done for the last 5 years, so probably not hardy, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
The idea of a hanging wall, I would like to translate it into a herb garden and have it just outside the kitchen door, because that would just be so useful.
Perfect, exactly. And I think as long as you get, you either liquid feed or you're good at putting in some slow release fertilizer, because obviously it's a very limited root run, things will grow in there for, as long as you can look after them.
I think with herbs, for instance, you could renew them every year if you needed to. I mean, you could take the old plants out, cut them back. I'm thinking of thymes and plants like that. Yeah. Saw them in half. You've got 2 plants for the price of 1, or you know what I mean. Yeah. You can rejuvenate them, and it's also very good for plants. I mean, for tucking a few seeds in, like parsley or chervil or coriander, which people either seem to love or hate.
Yeah, it's totally that. And with that one in the book, actually, it's nice to mention. So that was in Amy's garden. She was one of the editors of the book, and she lives over in Putney. I'm sure she won't mind me saying. And she said, I like the idea of this green wall. Can we do the photo shoot in my garden? And she bought it all, and I put it all together, and we photographed it there. And she messaged me the other day to say, because it's tiny space, there's no other greenery around there. And she messaged me to say there's now a wren nesting in it, which is adorable. And it's tiny. I mean, it's about 1 meter by 3 meters. it's obviously now a complete mass of ivy and Tradescantia, and there's little wrens nesting, which I just thought is brilliant. I mean, as soon as you've got plants, you're going to have wildlife and nature following. And they love it. You know, she really loves having this little green wall. It's easy to look after. It's easy to fill up the reservoirs on it. And then it almost looks after itself.
Nothing more complimentary, I think, than a bird nesting in your garden. I mean, sitting in the room here, there's just outside the window is a robin's nest. And I saw it arriving the other day with feathers in its nest. So it's now lining the nest with the actual straw or grassy nest with feathers. So I think it's fascinating. My dogs love it. They watch this come and go, and they.
No. So nice to see, though, isn't it? It's
absolutely,
it's brilliant.
Yeah, it's. I'm always being sort of trolled slightly by the other half because I have the most ridiculous rosemary, which really, any normal person would get rid of it because it's got old and it's sort of splaying a bit, and it's not
got personality.
It has personality. That's what I say. It has personality, but also I see it from where I sit at the kitchen table, and I watch all of the sparrows and the robin and all the little birds, the blue tits, all in the midst. Because it's a bit splayed, you can see them moving around a little bit, and they love it, and they hop from that into the acer and then across to the bird feeder, and there's no way I'm ever getting rid of it, even though it's probably past its best. But we can't get rid of everything when it's past its best.
No, and actually, in the book I do say, if you've got plants in the garden, just try and, because there's apps to identify things now, try and identify it, try and see what it is, rather than just going in with everything needs to come out, because sometimes things are decent in rental gardens, but they've just been mismanaged before. Just because something might be a bit old or look a bit characterful, I like that word, Alan, that's a very good description for a spindly old rosemary, but they can still bring loads of enjoyment, as your one does to you, Thordis.
There are certain plants that you probably would warn people off, I think. I remember particularly Fallopia, the raging vine that runs everywhere. It roots as it goes almost, and it becomes a huge nuisance. But there were two bungalows in a street that I used to regularly drive through, and they had a fence between each. And on one side they had the mile-a-minute vine, Fallopia, and it was the most immaculately kept fence that I've ever seen. And I was fascinated about this. And one day I stopped and I asked the gentleman who's in that house, I said, how do you manage to keep this looking so fantastic? And he said, well, I cut it every week. So there is a labor of love, but it can be done if that's your bag. The other thing is, on the other side, there was a Clematis montana, and it was growing on this fence, no more than about a metre tall. And it went probably, 90 feet. It was huge. I don't know how many plants there were, and that too was kept very tight as a hedge. And every year it flared its head off. It can be done.
Can be done. Yeah, there is a section that I think I call it something like plants to avoid or something along those lines, because in like a small urban garden or a rental garden, things like willows, poplars, eucalyptus, the mile-a-minute vine, there are just a handful of things that you just think, unless you're pruning it every week, as Alan just said, it's just not a good contender. But that mile-a-minute vine, you can pick it up quite easily in a lot of garden centres, and my goodness, does it have some vigor. It's talk about plant with caution.
The idea of a living wall I've always wanted to try, and I have always been frightened off, particularly because I've been concerned that to get a good starting structure would be really expensive. But are we now getting to the point where it's not just the sort of rubbish ones that are affordable, or is it a bit of an outlay?
Well, it was. I mean, it's not like 30 quid like those bag things that you hang on the wall. We're talking over 150 pounds or something. But for this one in the book. But the other thing is composite recycled plastic. It's going to last. It slots on the wall. You can take it off the wall. So I mean, you could, if you look after it and it's not bashed up, there's no reason why you couldn't get 20, 30 years out of it, maybe more. It's really decent, solid structure. And for me, I was thinking, when we do eventually buy our own place, if I've got some wall space, because I've got loads of small succulents and also loads of small ferns, I want to have one in sun and one in shade, because I've got so many small plants, and I probably won't have a big garden when we do buy, so there won't be loads of space for pots. So it's a brilliant way of getting a lot of diversity into a small space. So I will actually be buying more, and I think it'll be a good investment.
Yeah, you've given me a lot of inspiration there. I'm glad I asked that. Exciting
But,
times.
Of course, the other thing, if I add up all the price of, because I like terracotta pots, all the price of the pots, some of the ceramic pots, every time there's a storm, some blow over, some smash, you end up getting through a bit of money. And a green wall is fixed to the wall. It's not going to go anywhere. So, and pots cracking too. So I'm sure that would soon add up. It's just that one initial outlay.
I think the other thing is that, we all sort of have this thing about how our pots must be aesthetically pleasing, shall we say. But there are lots of containers that you can utilize. I mean, if you take one of those buckets that you buy fertilizer in, for instance, take the lid off that, take the handle off it and paint it. Put some holes in the bottom first, obviously, but paint it, but mix your colors as you go and just sludge them together. Become an artist, if you like, whether you go the grays or the greens or the blues or whatever you want. But just do that. As soon as the container starts to soften the edges, with the plants start to soften the edges of the containers, you won't see that container.
No.
We have big, expensive pots planted in the summer for summer colour with annuals and tender perennials. And I've often said to Graham, why do we have these expensive pots? Because we could have a metal barrel with the top cut off and just paint it a street colour, because by halfway through the season, you don't see it. It's gone. It's covered.
Yeah, exactly. And I talk about staggered pot displays, obviously larger plants at the back, smaller plants coming forward. And in my own garden in Fulham, the big plants at the back along the fence, they are just in black nursery stock, basic pots, because you can't see them. There's other things around them. So, you don't need to pay £150 for a lovely pot if it's going to disappear at the back of a display. Or the other really good, and I'm sure you have them at East Ruston Allen, whiskey barrels, the half barrels, the oak barrels. I'm not saying you drink a lot of whiskey. I'm just imagining you might have.
Thank you.
But maybe you do. Maybe you do have your own.
What you actually do have, Alan, are containers that look like they're great big kind of leaden containers or metal containers, but they're faux.
Yeah, they're actually made of fiberglass because, with the increased amount of wind and we grow large brugmanses in pots and large solanums in pots for the summer. And if you've got a pot that's narrower at the base, it will blow over. And if they're terracotta and they're expensive, it hurts.
It does.
I thought, get something that's square, wide at the base, so that it won't blow over. And I found this source. They're at the Chelsea Flower Show, actually, Capital Gardens products. I don't know whether you see them, but they do these imitation lead planters, and they are really, really good. And it's interesting because you see people visitors going up to them, tapping the sides, and then they shake their head, no, it's not real.
They're too right, it's not, because you see the price tag on the real ones. And they do blow over, as you say. They only need to blow over once. It's gone.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I've learned so much already. And anyone who saw that we were joining you at Wisley in your office and worried, oh no, he's not going to be able to do the fabulous show and tell that we had last time. Because if you haven't seen Matt's first appearance, we were in your wonderful rented home and we got a lovely little tour. We got a look out the window. It might have even been snowing. And we got a look at some of your house plants, which was, there was a wonderful amount of snoop factor, but also
I couldn't help it. I went back and had another look, and I'm seeing plants like Begonia rex outside all the year round. I'm seeing plants like Clivias outside all the year round, and I'm thinking, hey, what am I doing wrong?
Yeah, you do have a wonderful array of things in your courtyard, but you do have some interesting plants with you nonetheless for show and tell.
I do. Now, where shall I start? Shall I show you? Shall I just bring them to the camera?
Yeah, I think my favourite thing is when a guest says, "Where do I start?" and looks around.
Oh, I know, and I put a few around me, and I'm just thinking, I'm going to move some large pine cones. I have these Pinus coulteri cones in my office. Look at these monsters.
That's fabulous.
Wow.
They're off the tree at Wisley, the Widowmaker pine, it's called.
Yes, I'm not surprised. You get one of them on top of your head.
Exactly. You don't need me to explain that to you. So one beauty here. This is Sansevieria Bantel Sensation, which is the white variegated mother-in-law's
love
tongue.
it.
Cool.
Can you see?
That is
Nice.
a real showstopper.
Lovely, nice white stripy leaves. Absolutely huge thing. So it stands well over a metre tall.
How old is that?
I must have had that about 15 years. It's slow growing, as you can imagine, but you often see the yellow variegated ones around a bit, but the white variegated one is less so, and it's not as vigorous. It is slow. One of my favourite aloes is here. This is a bit easier to handle. This is Aloe erinacea, which has a lovely white spine with a dark brown tip to it.
And it's very kind of silvery. I know you like a silver plant.
I do. It's so, I mean, when you see them in full sun, they almost look white. It's lovely silvery. Oh, that's better for you. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Absolutely lovely.
A very pretty aloe. This next thing is a bit of a Marmite. There's some visitors to my office go, when they see this. It's a variegated African violet. Not for the faint-hearted, is it?
I'm not sure anyone's ever brought an African violet along. I'm really pleased that you have. And a variegated.
I have to confess that I have a liking for African violets. I don't have any. I don't have any for fear of being called an old granny. But I think that on north and east-facing windowsills, they make fantastic houseplants.
They really do. It's always in flower. I mean, I grow this for the foliage because I like variegated plants, as you know, and the foliage is pretty. And I'm often picking off the flowers, but it's always flowering. It's just constant.
Amazing. And I'll tell you one thing. I'll tell you something, Matt. When you hold a plant up like that, I mean, we tend to think of African violets as tiny little rosettes, one little rosette or two in a pot, if you like. But you've got one there that's several years old and could be divided should you wish to. But it has now, it's like Thunder's rosemary. It's got character because it's not that little dumpy thing, is it?
No, I know, because you buy them as a little dumpy rosette. Yeah. And of course, on this, I think I must have had this about, I don't know, at least 10 years. There's several heads to it. Yeah. And it's quite a grisly, monstrous thing, but it's characterful.
Yes, it is.
Most people must have a kind of, I think of my mum having African violets when I was little. And so I keep sort of thinking about getting one or two because they have that sort of sentimental value. And
also, if variegated isn't your bag, some of the cultivars now, there's like a double flowered green one, a lovely green, limey green flowered one with a double flower. I mean, it's stunning, and the doubles and some of the colour variants that have been bred.
The colour range has increased tremendously, hasn't it?
Has loads, yeah. So anyway, the African violet was a bit of a warm-up for what's coming next.
It's not a pot of Marmite, is it?
Oh, well, it may as well be, Alan.
Oh my God! Is that Zygocactus trunculatus?
It's Schlumbergera.
Oh, Schlumbergera.
Yeah, it's basically Christmas cactus, and it's one called, the name's quite uncreative, Norris variegated. It's basically the variegated form of Norris, which is one of the ready flowered ones. So when this is in flower against these leaves, you can imagine it's really like put your sunglasses on.
It also looks, it's like a big wig. It's like this great big hairdo.
That works, doesn't it?
I shall expect to see that at the Chelsea Flower Show.
I think I can pull it off, don't you?
It's like it's got little blonde highlights through your hair.
I know. Isn't it ridiculous? It's absolutely bonkers.
I mean, it's just so interesting because you never see it.
You don't. There's probably a good reason why. No, it is very rare in cultivation. Stephen Lacey gave it to me. I can't remember how he described it. It was rude. And, what did he say? He basically acknowledged it was rare and he shouldn't bin it. Someone had given it to him. And he said, you should have this, take this thing from me. And obviously I think it's fantastic, but it's a good conversation starter whenever a planter person comes into the office.
As such a sort of famous fan of variegation, do you find that sort of thing happening a lot, that people want to either get rid of a variegated plant they don't want, or they're just sort of gifting you stuff they think is outrageous.
You know what? It used to happen more, but less so now. And I think it's because it's certainly with houseplants, people are getting more into variegated ones, or also they're realizing they can make money from them. You put them on eBay. So it's not happening so much. I mean, that Schlumbergera, when I posted a picture of that on Instagram, I got several direct messages, actually all from people in Japan, offering me money for cuttings or the plant. And, you know, I don't have time to work out how to post things to Japan. If they were a bit more local, I would have happily put some cuttings in the post, because it's nice to show.
You're a wheeler dealer.
Yeah, exactly. But it never occurred to me that somebody would want cuttings off it. My next thing is not variegated, just in case everyone thinks I only have variegated plants. This is the crested form of the hare's foot fern. So it's Phlebodium aureum, which everyone knows, the hare's foot fern, and it's a cultivar called Davana, Davana. It looks like curled parsley.
That is
fabulous.
Absolutely astonishing. I am almost speechless.
Cool,
Everybody
right?
needs this plant.
Thunder, that'll never happen.
Yeah, complete lack of words never happens.
That Phlebodium is just super fantastic. I mean, it looked just plant envy.
So my office is north facing here. I've got two quite big windows north facing, and it's really happy. So there's not much direct light at all, and it's very dull in the winter, but it's good. It's huge, as you can see.
Oh, I love how it's all of its fronds waft around as well.
I know. I'm just trying to show the full scale of it. There we go.
It is huge.
It's ridiculous how many plants I've got in the office. It really is.
Well, we'd be disappointed if you didn't.
Yes, you would. Yeah, of course. I know.
Wow, that one, I think that's got just shot onto everyone's FLOMO list.
I hope so. It's one that is appearing a little bit more in houseplant. You know, if you go to a good garden centre with a big houseplant section, you do see it a little, you know, popping up a bit. I've had that for a few years, as you can see, and it was a mission to get it when I did. But it is appearing about a bit more now.
Isn't it strange how something like the pandemic has started people's interest, not just in gardening, but particularly in houseplants? And suddenly, you know, the people that produce these houseplants, they're thinking, hang on a minute, what was that thing we used to grow? We still got one kicking around. Propagate that. It's unusual. People go to a new generation of people and suddenly it's out there again.
I know. Suddenly it's big. And you can imagine some of these things that are popular now, perhaps, you know, they were big in the 70s, because you sometimes see them in old houseplant books, and then suddenly now everyone's going gaga for them again.
And it's such a gift that a lot of them, not all, but a lot are really easy to propagate. I mean, you're talking about the Tradescantias earlier. Well, after I saw your wonderful use of them, and then also seeing them at Allen's outside, I've been taking cuttings willy-nilly to try and grow some on to put outside when it gets a bit warmer. And they root. I mean, they almost root while you're watching them.
Yeah, they're good, aren't they? I mean, with that variegated pink one that I've got, that Nanouk, it was expensive to find and buy, but you know, once you've got it, then you've got it, and you can share it around, and it's so easy. Shall I tell you one more, or how are we running out of time?
We will have as many plants as you've got to show us. We want as much Matt Pottage plant porn as possible.
Okay. The next one I have, because it's special to me sentimentally.
You realise, Matt, she just fed you the title of a new book. Pottage plant porn.
Oh, I like that. Pottage's plant porn. I'll pitch that to DK, see what they say. So when I was young and I spent a lot of time with my grandma, who my love of plants came from, I used to always be in her greenhouse with her. And there was one cactus that used to really stand out to me that I just thought was absolutely astonishing. And anyway, that particular cactus and grandma are obviously no longer around, but I since found the cactus and I have it at work with me on the windowsill because it reminds me of her. And I don't have a lot of cactus. I'm more into succulents, really, but I find these really pretty. And it's Ferrocactus emeroii.
Oh,
really pretty spine colour. It's got a nice body, like grey turquoisey colour.
Nice and plumptious.
It is. Aren't they pretty, those spines?
Absolutely fantastic. I mean, I love the way that the new ones are almost a vibrant dark crimson.
They
And
are.
then they gradually change colour as they get older and bigger and more dangerous.
Yeah.
I also like a cactus where you know how to avoid the spines, if you know what I mean.
When I was a youngster, I had like most boys did, I started off with a collection of cacti. And again, like you, it's my grandma that sort of inspired my love of horticulture. And she used to help me repot them. And she suddenly said to me, "Why are you struggling with gloves when you're repotting your cactus?" And I said, "Why? What do you mean?" And she said, "Well, we'll roll a newspaper up and into like a tube, and then we'll bend it. We wrap it around the cactus. We give the newspaper a twist so it firmly holds the cactus. And then you tap the cactus out of its pot, holding it in this wrap of newspaper, and you don't get pierced." Brilliant.
It's a good tip. Great tip. Great tip. Yeah. And then you don't have to throw your gloves away afterwards because they're full of spines.
That's the other thing, isn't it? The gloves will always forever have spines in them.
Oh, I know, especially if it's a puntias, those flipping bunny ear cactus. So they look so friendly and so fun. You sometimes see them in garden centres with like "good for kids" on the label. And you think the last thing anyone needs near them. You never get with the spines out your hands. They're hideous.
And the trouble is they've got a little hook tip, haven't they?
That's it.
Once
yeah.
they go in, you can't pull them out.
No. Hours of swear words then follow when you sat with a pair of tweezers. And you feel them, but you can't see them. I mean, I love a puntias, but life's too short, isn't it?
Yeah. I'm too clumsy to have a puntias. I don't really allow myself to have cacti because I literally just fall over all the time. I bump things. I would be I have one cactus, and then I have my Ripsalis because it's strokeable, so it looks like a cactus, but I can't hurt myself.
There's a place in Norwich where there's a rather neglected it's on a pub, and I think it faces either west or south. There's a very old and decrepit looking window box with the most enormous puncher growing in it. And it's been there for years. And I suspect because it's so dry, nobody looks after it very much, and it's typical sort of cactus thing. It's very dry in the winter, so therefore it will take the cold, and it has a few yellow flowers on in the summer and some blobby old fruits.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool because I mean, puntias they do have some cold hardiness merits. We have a few outside at Wisley, and if you can keep them dry, as you point out, they will take quite a bit of cold, and I think they're great outdoors.
I saw them growing on the rockery in the Oxford Botanic Garden, and I thought, well, you can't get colder than that. Although, of course, Wisley can get quite cold, can't it?
Yeah, flipping cold, and that's actually it might be the Cambridge clone. There's a Puntia cantabrigiensis, which is around a bit both at Cambridge and Oxford, and we've got some here, and that's probably one of the toughest. Really good. Very good. And if it's outside, no one needs to really go anywhere near it. You just throw a bit of gravel around it a couple of times a year or whatever, and try and get bitter cress out with a pair of tweezers.
Exactly. And if its pads get cracked and deformed, well, that's part of the character of the plant.
Yeah, it is. Bizarrely, and I don't know if many listeners grow up puntias outside, but the things that always go for them, despite how horrible they are to be on or touch, is slugs and snails. They always cause a mess.
Because they're so slippery and they can weave their way between the spines, I guess.
Yeah, must be able to. You think, what's earth's been on this? Sure enough, slug and snail damage.
Yeah.
Have we exhausted your show and tell now?
Well, no. But
brilliant.
But, I mean, I don't know. Well, there's an enormous cheese plant in here, but I can't move that, of course. I do also have a very nice, but it's propped up against the window, a big Aloe variegata.
Oh!
Can you see?
Oh, yes, that's wonderful.
I also have a nice, can you see that?
Oh!
the Lycopodium, it's known as a club moss. Lycopodium squarosum. You see in a hanging pot there. Really, really cool thing. Grows in orchid bark. It's one of the tropical, I think it's quite a prehistoric kind of makeup, a very early fern or moss relative.
I might like that even more than the hare's foot. That is so weird and wonderful.
It's really flexible to the touch.
It looks like a little alien or a long alien.
I know. And the branches, you can see how they start, then it divides into two, then it goes into two, then it goes into two, and then by the end, they're quite bushy. There's another bit of let me just push that light out. There's two stems coming out of the hanging pot, so you can see one stem there. It's all coming from that hanging pot.
I think that's a very interesting plant.
Yes.
It's really, really cool, isn't it? It's another thing that always gets attention from people come in for a meeting. They're like, what is that thing hanging down in that pot?
Is it alive?
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
Sorry,
talk about plants with character.
I know, and I now just realised I'm in a very dangerous position. I've got those great big pine cones at my feet. I've got a cactus sat right next to my hot cross bun. I'm probably going to be bleeding within the next 5 minutes.
Just don't get the cactus and the hot cross bun confused.
That would be problematic.
Well, I think you've left us with an absolute ton of Flomo. Such exciting plants in your office. People must be desperate to come and hang out in there. And the hot cross buns, obviously.
Yes.
So Flomo, it feels like an apt moment to move on to Flomo. I know that when I go through making the plant list for this episode, I'm going to be adding several of them into my actual official Flomo list, which is very long, much longer thanks to this podcast. Flomo being that fear of missing out you get about a flower or a plant. It is a year-round trial I live through, and I get a lot of it from your Instagram, Matt. I must say your London courtyard is such an inspiration. I am desperately trying to make my shady patio better, and I've had a lot of help from Alan. He's been helping me out with ferns and things. Gave me a lovely Blechnum chilense the other day, which is going to go on my shady patio. But on that sort of note, I saw you post a photo of your patio, your courtyard area with Pyrrosia sheareri, which I may have said wrong, which you said thrived in a shady corner and had these bronze felty undersides. So obviously one to try and plant or position where you can see the undersides of those ferny fronds, but seemed to be one you were very enthused about.
I love it. The leaves are like cardboard on it. They're really, really strong, architectural. And when they're young, they're white on the undersides, and then they go to this bronzy colour. And yeah, it's very, very, it almost looks a bit like a mini aspidistral. You know, they're quite big, not very divided fronds. And it's in a really dark, dull corner on a windowsill, on the outside of the windowsill, and we can see it inside the house. And it's super. They're not an everyday thing, but you can get them from any fern nursery or, you know, specialist grower. It's really worth it. And they're evergreen as well. So you've got some winter interest too.
And it's obviously hardy in your courtyard, but you're in London. Is it hardy elsewhere?
Yeah, well, we've got it outside at Wisley, but it is by a wall. But I mean, it'll get -6, -7 here. If it has a very cold winter, it will either lose its fronds altogether, or if you get to about -10, I think it will die. It's not bone hardy. But if you've got it on a windowsill or you can bring it up against a wall for the winter, I think you will be fine 9 times out.
On that note, Matt, you just sort of triggered something in my mind, and that is to think that in the last, well, probably 30 years, how much more interesting our gardens have become because of the plants that we can grow outside, which, as you say, are not necessarily bone hardy, because we know what a bitch Dame Nature can be, and she can always throw something horrid at us, just to remind us who's in charge sometimes, I expect. But, you know, just think how much more interesting our gardens have become. I mean, Tradescantia outside, I would never have thought that it would come back in this garden 20 years ago. Today it does. It's fascinating, isn't it? I mean, it's all due to climate change.
Yeah, such a wider palette. And I think also sometimes you accept, okay, I might get 10 years out of it, or 15 years, or till the next bad winter, but then that's also fine. I'm happy that's value for money. You know, I paid a tenner for it. You know,
exactly.
There's all manner of those cool variegated Cordylines around, and you think, okay, if we get another winter like 2010, maybe it will die. But if I get, you know, a handful of years out of it, fine, you know, I'm happy with that too. So
I planted Cordyline Charlie Boy, which you may or may not know. It's very in your face.
Very pink.
It is streaky chaparelli pink. But I love it. It's come through the last 4 or 5 winters here. As easy as anything. And I mean, I know that in actual fact it jars the eye, and so I've got to devise plantings that will go with it. But I can't bring myself to remove it because, you know, it might remove itself due to the weather at some point. And I'm pleased to have it while I can.
And also, when I came over for Snowdrop Day and I was walking around the garden, you know, looking at all the snowdrops, you round a corner and suddenly you were face to face with Charlie Boy, and suddenly thought, where are my sunglasses? But it was wonderful.
Yeah, nice. They are fun. There's been a lot of new cultivars of them around in the last few years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another FLOMO for me, which isn't a serious one because I wouldn't be able to give it what it wants, but I've seen your enthusiasm, your joy about your Lapageria rosea.
Yeah.
Different time of year, and I always think of Alan whenever I think of that plant, because I know you like it, Alan, and also when I went to Chatsworth, you were like, look out for the Lapageria.
It's beautiful.
There's an elderly lady who lives not far from me, and she has it on a north-facing wall on her house. And she had over 60 flowers on it about 3 years ago because she sent me a picture of it. I have managed 5 on mine, but that's all.
Well, I found it always a mission to keep it alive. I always found it's just something that wants to die for me. So to keep one for a few years now in a pot on a tripod and then to have it flowering, as you saw, because I don't know how many times I put it on Instagram. I was so obsessed with it. I was just, I was so pleased. But there's just something, I don't know, it gets me with those long, trumpety, waxy, they don't look real.
No, they look completely artificial. And if you've seen them growing in the conservatory at Chatsworth, I mean, they grow them so well there. I have to say, there's not a blemish on the leaf. They are fantastic.
Yeah, and you don't expect, because if you see a Lapageria out of flower, I mean, no one's going to stop and look at the leaves. These piddly little windy stems. And then you think, how on earth does that flower come from that miserable looking little thing?
Where's the nourishment in that stem to produce that flower?
I know. None of it makes sense. And you see the little spindling and a huge great trumpet hanging off it. I just find them incredible and so beautiful.
They remind me of the old-fashioned Christmas lights we had when I was a child, actually.
Yeah.
Big old bulbs.
Yeah, beautiful. And I don't know, it's not an everyday plant, and I don't think it ever will be because it's just so difficult to please. But it's, everyone likes challenge, don't they? So
yeah. Well, I think this is the thing. The more competent you become about gardening, the greater knowledge that you acquire. You therefore want to grow. I mean, I'm just looking at the list of plants I've written down that you've been talking about, and there's 7 or 8 here that not many people will be growing. So
which is so exciting.
I'm going to tell you what my FLOMO is now.
Tell me what your flymo is. Yeah, what
my FLOMO is?
How do you know your lawns at East Ruston?
My FLOMO for today is going to be everything that Matthew Pottage showed and told.
Tell me what's your favourite one of them all? I mean, I'm always interested to know what kind of catches people, because you both seem to like that hare's foot fern, but then you like the club moss in the hanging basket.
Well, I did. I like the club moss in the hanging basket purely and simply because I've never seen anything like it. I just thought that was so interesting, and the fact that it grows in orchid bark and it's either sort of moss or fern or whatever it is, that intrigued me. But for sheer glamour, Phlebodium stood out head and shoulders above all else, apart from Sansevieria Bantel's, is it? Sensation?
That's the one. Yeah.
And the interesting thing is that anybody can grow bog standard ordinary houseplants, but to actually grow the ones that you've shown us today is just more than. Much
good,
more.
Good. Yeah. I'm glad you like them. Because I was thinking, am I going to have a run around the garden and collect a few things? And then I thought, maybe I'll show you my houseplants, see what you think. But they are a bit of an acquired taste.
So I'm going to be trolling the internet all this afternoon, I think.
I always think it's unfair that we get a sort of head start on these things because we can go and look before everyone who watches and listens then starts Googling. And knowing Alan, he'll probably buy 7 of them and that'll be all the stock.
Yeah, that'll be them all. That Lycopodium, though, look it up because people grow them and post them on Instagram. My Lycopodium is, to be honest, pretty underwhelming compared to what some people have because they just get better and better. They send more stems, they get thicker and bushier, and they look, old plants look amazing. So I think, if you do hashtag Lycopodium on Instagram, I bet you will find other people's because they are absolutely, breathtaking. They really are.
Funnily enough, that was basically what I was going to do straight after the podcast.
And then you'll probably think, Matt's is actually quite underwhelming compared to these because mine's not very old. But there's some amazing ones out there.
I'm glad we've left your Flomo till last, Matt, because we both had a little sneaky preview at it, and I think this is a rather fun plant. So what is your Flomo, Matt?
Well, it's something a friend sent me the other day that they'd seen. Well, it's in an orchid nursery, and it's well over £1,000 per plant, so I'm not going to be buying one anytime soon. But it's this browny green Cymbidium, and it's variegated, of course. So it's got these whitey cream stripes of the leaves, this quite unusual flower shade. And I love Cymbidiums, but what I don't like is all the foliage that you're staring at for 11 and a half months of the year, and then obviously it flowers and then those go. And they need quite a bit of space because they're big, they bulk up fast, and the leaves are huge. And I just, there's nowhere where I have that volume of space that I'm willing to dedicate to a plant that flowers so little, unless it has interesting foliage. And this walnut, I pinged you over that picture of it. It has really pretty leaves, so I would happily grow that if it was either in my price range or somebody wanted to donate me a piece of their own. So, and you don't see variegated orchids every day. I mean, I literally have a couple, but you don't come across them all the time. And sometimes I like orchids as a plant group, but I generally don't make space for them because I find, when they're not in flower, the foliage just doesn't do a lot for me. So I was quite taken with it, but I don't think it's actually got a name to it, or it's not been named yet. But it was something that I saw a couple of weeks ago. I would like that in my life.
So some people would win the lottery and buy a sports car or a foreign holiday, and you'd probably just go out and buy that Cymbidium orchid.
Yeah, probably so. That's me. You can imagine I'm a scream to live with.
I think we all are, to be honest, Matt. Thank you so much for coming along. People need to, if they don't feel like How to Garden When You Rent as a book is going to be perfect for them, well, first of all, they're wrong. I think that everyone should get it, but it's also, I think, a great gift if there are people in your life who are renting or are new to gardening, etc. Loads of great ideas and great plants in it, and I hope it sells like hotcakes or like hot cross buns.
Thank you very much. Thank you for covering it, and thank you for inviting me back. It's been great fun, as I knew it would be.
Please come back soon with even more wonderful plants for us to covet. In the meantime, happy gardening, everybody.
Happy gardening. Lovely to talk to you, Matt.
What time zone are you in? So you're in the dark because it's dark at your window. Alan's got the fire going. Is he in like the North Pole or something? Where are you all?
I'm in Cambridge, where it's just very dark today.
No, but I think Matt thinks it's a window behind you, but it's not. It's a glass cupboard, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, that's a cupboard.
I was thinking, how many hours did you turn to the clocks? It looks like 2 a.m. now.
For some reason, your camera just went a bit blurry, unless my eyes have gone funny.
No, it does look blurry, actually. Is that any better?
Massively. I mean, you are sort of in focus. Maybe.
Sort of in focus. That basically means you're not in focus.
This is the kind of focus they use on aging film stars, I think.
Yeah, it's the kind of focus I need today, Alan. I think
No,
it's
you don't. No, you don't.
Well, I've got that. If you go into the settings on Zoom, there's like a beauty filter, I think, that blurs things a bit.
I can assure you I haven't used it today, but I will be checking it out.
Know this?
Hey, you've got it!
Alan's will be going on the fire this afternoon when that's running low.